As an herbalist, are there any popular herbs that you think people should be avoiding?
I think
Hey everyone, today I spoke with herbalist Olivia Amitrano all about herbs. This was a fantastic conversation. She really helped me to have a better appreciation for the different dosing forms, meaning tincture versus capsule versus tea, what herbs are best to consider for what condition, and shared something I thought was fascinating in that depending on how the herb looks or based upon how the herb looks, this can indicate what condition the herb should work best for. So, just a very interesting conversation wherein we explored the wonderful world of plant medicinals, which we use a lot in the clinic, and I'm sure some of you are experimenting with yourselves. So, a much more expansive and informative conversation to follow now with herbalist Olivia. Olivia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Doc. It's such an honor.
Yeah, we met at a Forever Strong conference with Gabrielle Lyon, and
It was
turns out,
quite the conference.
yeah, it was quite the extravaganza, really. And as we got to talking, turns out you're a pretty astute herbalist, and I thought it would be interesting to pick your brain because we've had on the other end of the spectrum some really sort of deep academics, people from
Mhm.
Mayo, people from Leeds. That's one side of my brain. But the other side is, well, there may not be a ton of research, let's say, on digestive bitters, but for some people, these are super helpful. And in our practice, we kind of pull together from where we have science and also where maybe there's traditional observations with various herbal medicine. So I said, oh, let's have a herbalist on to really do a deep dive.
I love that. Yeah, I think there's a whole world of like tradition passed down by elders, which was kind of how my education was structured in school, where we had guest teachers come in that were taught this in their lineage, you know, dating like 10 lineages back. And it's kind of a different form of science. It's still a repeated, time tested remedy or like measure of results. It's just been passed down in a different way. And what's cool is we're starting to get some science around things like adaptogens and seeing how they might work.
Totally, totally. And maybe with that as sort of a preamble, as an herbalist, what's the most important thing you've learned about herbal medicine?
Wow, that's a
It's a
that's a big
loaded
question
question, I
there.
know.
Um, the most important thing I've learned about herbal medicine is perhaps that you can't push the body, in
Mm,
the sense that an herb might work incredibly well for a client for a set period of time, and then that herb itself will almost become stubborn and stop being as effective because it is almost asking the person to continue the practices that will help to mimic whatever boost in brain chemicals or biological function that it was previously providing.
sure.
And so I find that herbs kind of have this personality or this spirit where you can't rely on them forever. And again, they're not going to push systems where you're going to get a complete remission in something like type 2 diabetes. They're going to work with your body and with your existing systems in a totally different way and teach you what your body needs so that you can then put that into your lifestyle practices.
If this has been helpful, please subscribe, comment, and share this video with one person you think it might help. Sort of playing on that, it's a little bit of a different concept, but it reminds me of Stephen Sandberg Lewis, who's a naturopath at NUNM. And he talked about this cycling of herbal antimicrobials for stubborn SIBO. It sort of, you use one set for a month, then you switch to a different set. And to your point, ultimately the goal is to be off of the herbs. But
Yeah.
for whatever reason, he was seeing this improvement when he didn't just sort of pedal to the metal with oregano, let's say, but he switched from oregano to berberine to maybe garlic. And that's something I've been doing for a while. And I also noticed it's helpful. And maybe in part it's because the immune system after a while doesn't tolerate the herb. Or to your point, maybe there's something more beyond just the immune system component. But certainly I would agree with you that there's something to variety with the herbal medicines that we use.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that there's no way that we're ever going to understand exactly what kind of bacterial overgrowth we have, and it's going to ebb and flow and change from day to day. Even if you do a GI map or whatever incredible test comes out,
Right.
you'll get an idea of the populations that are off, but we're not measuring all of them. And because herbs are so broad spectrum, each one, like berberine, well, berberine's not an herb, but an herb that contains berberine as a compound, like coptis or golden seal, might have broad spectrum alkaloids that attack one bacterial population that we're not even aware of, whereas something like the herbs in biocidin or oregano or thyme attack a totally different population. So because there's still so much about the body and the microbiome that we don't know, it is nice to lean on the herbs that also have these compounds that we are not even aware of to help tackle that.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, and this is where I think the traditional wisdom comes in because we can isolate from an herb that has multiple components, maybe one alkaloid that we know is antimicrobial or anti-inflammatory, but there are also many others, which is why you'll see something like artemisinin, which is one of my favorite derivatives from wormwood, that's antiparasitic, antimalarial, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antiviral. It has all of these actions, which is one of the things I love about herbal medicines is you have this sort of ecosystem effect. Also to your point, which
Yeah.
is, and I couldn't agree with it more strongly that we need to evolve past the perspective of, well, it's just a candida that I'm treating, or even worse, I'm a candida patient or I'm a SIBO patient. And as much as we want people to have solace of a diagnosis, I think it is too reductionistic. And we should be thinking more broadly about the ecosystem. And this is where the herbs, in many cases, modulate the entirety of the ecosystem.
Yes, herbs absolutely modulate rather than even kill. There, again, might be some antimicrobial alkaloids or compounds in there that we know are antibacterial to some extent, but I don't think they're ever going to be as strong as something like an antibiotic and be all killing as an antibiotic is. And they're also going to modulate perhaps populations of healthy bacteria. Even when you look at plant compounds that are not herbal, like the proanthocyanidins in cranberry or in other red pigmented berries, we do know that they create an environment in the gut that is a little bit less hospitable to quote bad bacteria, but they also create an environment in the gut where good bacteria can then grow and perhaps kill off the rest of that bad bacteria. So modulating involves feeding good populations, perhaps creating environments that are less favorable to bad pathogens. It doesn't mean killing flat out.
Right. And then some of these things, cranberry makes me think of beet, sort of these red, very polyphenol rich compounds that may also function
Mhm.
as antioxidants. So, we even broader further all of the cool things that herbs do. And as a scrupulous scientist, it is important to look for some research when we have it, because the other thing we're
Yeah.
trying to contend against is the charlatans just telling you that this one herb is going to solve all problems. And maybe that poses another question. I can say in my field, I am progressively and continually frustrated by people who are just saying whatever they want, right? They're irresponsible, I think. And this is probably a constant in politics, in law, in marketing, in healthcare and medicine. There are some that are just not careful with their words. They're probably trying to help, but they're likely, in my opinion, honestly ignorant to what they don't know. It's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger. The less you know, the
Mhm.
more confident you are. But how do you think about this? How do you contend with people in herbal medicine that you may see making claims that upset you due to the lack of rigor or carefulness that underlies them?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting line to toe because in order to get people excited about herbal medicine, you do almost have to kind of like market herbs in a way. There's
Right.
certain ways that I'll talk about an herb, even like chamomile, for example, using the language that my teachers and my elders gave me, where we know that, for example, chamomile is really good for the person who tends to internalize all of their stress to their stomach. And so when they're
Mm.
stressed, it just feels like there's this rock in their stomach. We also say that chamomile is for people crying on the outside, whereas an herb like catnip is for people crying on the inside, where they might be going through
Hmm.
something, but they're not going to tell you that they're suffering. So I like when people um, educate slash market slash bring consumers into the fold of what herbal medicine can do for them by creating a relationship with single herbs, like really teaching people the breadth of the tradition and the indications and the possible mechanisms for single herbs so that they can understand how that herb may play a role in their picture, and where we're also kind of honoring the spirit and the personality of that plant. But then on the other hand, yeah, of course, it definitely bothers me when people are like, these are the top 5 herbs for X condition, because you have no idea the exact root causes that are playing a role in that person's development of X condition.
Right.
That person's root causes could be completely different from another person's root causes. So it's better when you educate about how X herb can perhaps tackle X root cause through this mechanism and what this herb is traditionally indicated for, so that people can start to kind of put the pieces together themselves and or be encouraged to talk to a practitioner about whether an herb is right for them.
And it is challenging, isn't it? Because to get someone's attention, you kind of have to have a very clear, almost dichotomous, this good, that bad, like you said, the top five.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe that can be a starting point. But then from grasping someone's attention, we just want to be attentive to, as we say, axiomatically, listening to someone's body. That's one helpful way to make sure that we're not just shoehorning someone into, for everyone it's gymnema or for everyone it's curcumin, but
Yeah.
rather listening and personalizing to their system.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've written articles before that are like top 5 herbs for stress, but I then use that article as a chance to go into the specific indications of 5 different adaptogens and explain that if you're someone who is a lot drier, you have a lot of dryness within your skin, your mucous membranes, maybe you're aging, maybe you have some, night sweats when you're going to bed, something like American ginseng or eleuthero, which are a little bit more moistening and nourishing, might be a better adaptogen for you. Whereas if you're someone who's dealing with an autoimmune condition, an immune amphoteric adaptogen like Schizandra that can help bring an immune response up or down might be a better fit for your quote stress and energy levels. So it's like kind of using those interesting headlines that will grab someone's attention to then take that opportunity to educate and explain the nuances between different herbs. I think that's a fun
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I've also written and done videos on, top five warning signs or top five uses of. Okay, there's so much here I want to pick up on. I definitely want to talk about adaptogens. Certainly want to come back to what you like herbally for digestion. But
Yeah.
I do want to maybe start on the thread of mood and what herbs you found to be most impactful for mood, and maybe share with us some of the mechanisms of actions through which they improve things like depression or anxiety or what have you.
Absolutely. So the first herb that comes to mind for mood is definitely St. John's wort. I think this is one that many people are familiar with, and you might even be able to find in your local CVS, unfortunately, through a brand like Nature Made, who's probably not harvesting it correctly. But in a traditional lens, I'll first speak to the way that this plant was introduced to me by my teachers. This is a plant that really blooms and starts to flower in a very short period around the summer solstice. And it's this very special experience where this plant is storing so much energy in its roots and its leaves before it finally comes out to flower. And then it expresses through this really beautiful, solar, yellow, happy flower. And that's kind of what we talk about in traditional herbalism as the doctrine of signatures, where part of the plant's actual physical presentation can give us clues as to how this plant may work.
Mm,
And so my teachers would always share that because this plant blooms at essentially the maximum solar part of the year where we have the most sun and light energy in the environment, as we harvest that plant and create tinctures for the winter months, we're able to kind of save and later impart some of that solar energy within to our psyche when it
interesting.
comes time for seasonal affective disorder. What that looks like in an actual scientific Western lens is that we know that St. John's wort may actually modulate and improve serotonin, for example. It may modulate GABA receptors and dopamine levels. It may help to lower inflammation, actually, that's coming from our gut, our digestive system, in order to modulate neuroinflammation via the gut brain axis. It may also help to upregulate certain liver detoxification pathways like cytochrome P450 in order to help us become more astute when it comes to eliminating excess hormones and toxicants from the environment, which of course would play a role in our overall inflammatory load and oxidative stress and thus our
Mm,
mood. So that's one example where tradition tends to translate to science many
Yeah,
years
and
later.
yeah, and let's pick up on that because St. John's wort, admittedly, is not one that I've used a lot of. So I'd love to sort of pick your experience here. Are you finding that, or maybe just like sketch the avatar of what the person presents like for whom you feel St. John's wort is the most indicated?
Yeah, this is someone who's going to have a really marked appearance of seasonal affective disorder every year, where as soon as the sun comes out, their mood is changing so drastically within that day or so that you're like, oh, yeah, this is a person who really needs the sun, who needs that solar energy. It's also going to be a person who tends to have some frazzled nerves. They're going to be hypersensitive to stress. And another preparation in terms of how we use St. John's wort in the herbal world is that we will infuse St. John's wort flowers into some kind of an oil using heat and thyme.
Mm,
And we'll use that oil topically to kind of help coat and soothe and ground the nerves when someone is experiencing periods of increased stress. So this will be a person who's very frazzled, who is just very melancholic. They kind of just have this dark perspective of the world that again needs that boost of light even within their psyche and their perspective. And they're also often people who deal with some degree of chronic pain. That's part of the indication. They're not only having periods of low mood and cycles of low mood, but they're also having cycles of inflammation driven pain that comes and goes.
gotcha. So it's not necessarily someone who has depression sort of all the time, and they're looking at St. John's wort as like popping a pill that's a natural antidepressant. You think there needs to be more of this sort of seasonality to that presentation.
I think that is probably the most helpful way because I also find that it's a good practice to cycle it. I think that with any kind of mood and serotonin modulating herb, you also don't want to again like try to push things too far, create some of that dependence. So it is good to cycle on and off of it and use it seasonally. But I have seen cases where this is helpful for someone who just has more of like a picture of generalized depression
Right.
and needs a tool for a period of let's say like 3 to 4 months or even more to really shift that pattern and shift not only their mindset, but their habits enough to where then their habits start to pick up the work of lowering that inflammation and modulating those brain chemicals.
Right, right. And something you had mentioned earlier in some of the note correspondence that we had going back and forth in terms of what should we talk about today was a note about how chronic health issues can impact the nervous system. And I know for some people in our audience, it may be chronic IBS, pain, bloating, constipation, diarrhea. It might be chronic fatigue or joint pain, whatever the symptoms are. There's some degree of chronicity for a facet of our audience. Can you speak more about how you think about supporting that? Because certainly, I've noticed that how we handle mindset, framing, like I said before, I'm a candida patient. I look at that as sort of a
Mm.
psychological weed that we need to pull out and reframe with something more empowering. But would love to hear your perspective here.
Yeah, there's something I've been looking into recently, and I can provide a resource for you to put in the show notes. But there's something called limbic retraining. Have you heard of
Oh, we've
this when
talked a
it
lot
comes to the
about that. Yeah,
mindset?
we've had Asha Gupta on
Yeah.
the podcast, and
Yes.
yep,
Oh my gosh. Amazing. So yeah, I think that that's especially when it comes to chronic symptoms where the symptoms then become a driver of stress additionally,
right,
where essentially at baseline stress is part of the picture as to why that person is experiencing symptoms. So take digestive like IBS where there's like chronic digestive insufficiency, maldigestion and someone is constantly having gas, bloating, pain, etc. from the food that they're eating. A piece of that may very well be stress and nervous system driven because when the body is in fight or flight more often than not and is in a pattern of sympathetic dominance, you are not in a state where your body can be in rest and digest mode before your meals, and thus you're not secreting the proper digestive cascade of hydrochloric acid, which stimulates your digestive enzymes as well as bile release. So stress in itself and not being able to get out of the stress loop is sometimes part of or even the reason why someone is having digestive issues. And then the experience of digestive issues themselves, anticipating it, kind of looping and obsessing over it while it's happening can then further that cycle.
right, right. And this all is fully agreed, by the way. And I think limbic retraining of whatever program. It could be Gupta, it could be DNRS. There's also emotional freedom technique, this sort of tapping method that's used, time in nature, exercise, all these things I'm sure you talk about quite a bit yourself. Even some CBT apps. We've been referring for an app called Clarity for people who may not want to go the extent to the Gupta limbic retraining program, which is at least 20 minutes. They want you to do an hour per day. I think you can get away with 20 minutes. But something nice, especially for those who sort of catastrophize. I'm having
Yeah.
bloating, therefore I'm having leaky gut, therefore I'm having systemic inflammation, therefore I'm harming my brain. That sort of negative
Yeah.
cascade.
Therefore, I'm never going to heal this. Therefore, yeah,
Right,
tried
right.
everything. Yeah.
This is where we
Yeah.
found the Clarity app has a nice feature that sort of disarms some of those negative feedback loops.
Yeah, you know what? And I think it's also it comes down to, like you said, mindset and the way that we're almost willing to take a little bit of a risk or gamify the way that we experience things. You and I were just talking about how we're both Italian, and there's a phrase in sort of Italian culture, I guess I'd say, non è niente, where it's like, it's nothing.
Mm,
And that's actually kind of a powerful mindset shift that you can take where when you're experiencing something, actually just challenging yourself to be like, it's nothing. It's
yeah,
fine. And the more that you can just kind of like kick that out of your brain and practice just recognizing the thought, saying, okay, it's here, but guess what? It's nothing. Those are kind of strategies that you can at least try on for size to help
yep,
the nervous system piece become disarmed.
yeah, very well said. Could not agree more. Um, what about relationships? This obviously ties to relationships, and I know this is something that you think a lot about. Obviously, it's also a very broad and deep topic, but are there a few points on relationships that you think people should be aware of?
Yeah, I think that we often don't realize how much energy we are utilizing to show up in relationships in either a non authentic way, a way in which we are people pleasing and constantly taking on the other person's experience and relationship with us and trying to accommodate their needs and over please. And there's also an element of not having adequate boundaries in relationships, which can also lead to overgiving, but can just also lead to this dysregulation in relationship that is actually zapping us of some of the energy that we need in order to
Right.
complete our metabolic functions, complete our proper digestion, fuel our immune cells. And so, stress in relationships, I really think that relationship stress is kind of all there is. I mean, obviously, there's health stress and financial stress, but that kind of ties back to relationships. I'm stressed about my finances because I'm not going to be able to provide for my family. I'm stressed about my health because it's keeping me away from spending time with my family or my friends or showing up and connecting with people, which is what really makes me happy. And most of the issues that we deal with on a daily basis, I think, can be tied back to strain within our relationships. When we're calling a friend and venting, it's usually I had a fight with this family member, or I had a fight with my partner, or this thing is
Right.
happening within a dynamic with my friend. And so relationships matter a lot more for our health than we realize. And I think often just being able to develop mindset strategies around engaging with relationships in a healthier way, like practicing radical honesty, like communicating our boundaries, like realizing that showing up authentically is okay and we don't have to feel shame about who we are, can then have um, very high returns in our actual physical health.
You're reminding me of, I recently started using, it's called the 5 minute journal. And it's just a quick,
Mm,
literally about 5 minutes, what I'm grateful for, positive affirmations, what would make today a great day, just a few quick things like that to sort of prime your mind to focus on what you want. There's a story that they tell about, this is sort of in the preface of the journal, why to use it, how to use it, that sort of thing, where this man was going through a really dark time in his life. And he started this habit of when I come home, the first thing I'm going to do is share with my wife one good thing that happened at work today, rather than, coming from this dark place, wanting to vent and to kind of get into all the darkness and the negativity. He would start his interaction with his wife off with one positive thing. And apparently that really sort of tilted the perspective of their entire evening together because he started their connection for the evening on a positive note.
I love that. I think um, looking to relationships as places to share and expand our joy and receive like a mirroring of that joy is a really powerful
Yeah.
concept. And I think that's wise advice.
Relationships can be stressful or hopefully stress alleviating. Something that may
Yeah.
also help with stress could be adaptogens. I know you talk a
Yeah.
lot about these, you have a lot of experience with these. Um, for the people in our audience who maybe don't even know what these are, what they do, can you give us the quick definition and then some of the formulas or herbs that you like here?
Yeah. Yeah, so adaptogens are these plants that help to bolster our non-specific resilience in the face of stress. And they're quite non-toxic. We take them in pretty large, multiple gram size doses because they are essentially food. They are often just the roots of plants and they are these food-like roots. So they're non-toxic. You take them in large doses. And what they're doing is they're helping your body to have a greater capacity to respond to physical and emotional demands. And they do this by acting on our HPA axis, which I'm sure you've talked about to a large extent, our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which also involves other hormones. And what it's doing is helping our this HPA axis to be less responsive to stressors and perhaps have less of an output of cortisol in the face of something that's stressing us out, or improve our endorphin levels through this HPA axis so that we already have a baseline greater perspective and approach to the stressors in our lives. And we're not too sure exactly how this works, but research is starting to come out showing that adaptogens, for example, can stimulate our heat shock proteins, which is the same phenomenon that's being seen when someone is entering a sauna. So they may be doing this through sort of like a hormetic stressor pathway, where when we enter a sauna and we have our body withstand a very high temperature that's knocking us out of homeostasis, we actually get a little bit stronger by having to temporarily adapt to that stressor of heat.
Right.
And so adaptogens may be doing this as well on a biochemical level, but they're also preventing immune suppression in the face of stress. So they're keeping our immune system functioning and healthy and responsive when we're overworked and undersleeping. They're also helping to protect our brain's neurons, for example, from stress because they have a very high antioxidant content. So they're going to help protect us from oxidative stress on a cellular level. And there's so many different ones, and this is where the personality of plants kind of gets to come in, where someone who is suited to something like Schizandra is going to be totally different from someone who's suited to something like rhodiola or ashwagandha.
So you tend to prefer single ingredient? Because I know there's a lot of formulas that will have three, four, five, six different herbs as opposed to you could do just eleuthero or rhodiola or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think when you're dealing with the general population, blends are actually a lot more suited
Mm,
because you don't know someone's constitution, you don't know their energetic patterns, you don't know if they run hot or cold or dry or
right.
damp. So having a very neutral blend of adaptogens, kind of an equal formulation of heating or warming adaptogens as well as cooling adaptogens is the best way to make something that's palatable to the masses. So that's what I do in my line. I have an adaptogen formula, and it's kind of like the perfect energetic balance of a few different adaptogens. So we don't push the body in any one way. We just provide that overall antioxidant HPA axis support. But when you're working with someone one on one, it's actually fun to be able to customize a blend of adaptogens where you're maybe relying on 1 to 3 hyper specific ones that really match their personality and their presentation. So, for example, Schizandra is this adaptogen that when you taste it, it is a berry. It's like the 5 flavor berry and it has all of these different flavors, but the predominant flavor of Schizandra is sort of sour and astringent.
Mm,
And anything that is like sour, tart, astringent is going to have this consolidating and tightening effect in the body. So, whenever we see tissues in the body that are lax, if someone's struggling with leaky gut, we're going to maybe look to adaptogens that are astringing that can
mm,
also help them on that gut brain level. And then when someone is having more of these presentations in their personality or their way of being that a practitioner can notice through having a relationship with the patient, like their thoughts are kind of all over the place, leaky thoughts is what my one of my teachers would call it. Schizandra is this herb that kind of has this tightening effect even on the thoughts and the speech, and helps someone to feel more concise and organized mentally. So
Right.
it's a really interesting
Cool.
astringing effect where it goes beyond just the gut.
Yeah, nice, nice. And you're reminding me of how many of these are these what we would maybe traditionally call an adrenal adaptogen are being used in, let's say, chronic Lyme as a complement to
Yeah.
maybe the primary antimicrobial because it helps you with the stress, the inflammation, the immune system, which is also what's so
Yeah.
cool about herbal medicine is you can have an anti-inflammatory impact on the brain, an improvement with sleep due to the hormetic effect, and also a bolstering impact on the immune system, all with something like ginseng.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And when it comes to Lyme, that's such a good point because I think half the battle of Lyme is perhaps the load of the pathogen, right? Just keeping that pathogen load down with things like antimicrobials, like anti-spirochete herbs. But the other piece of the picture when it comes to Lyme disease is actually teaching the body and the immune system how to live with this bug because there is no evidence that we can fully eradicate Lyme. And there's plenty of people that when they do a Lyme test, they are positive for Lyme, but they have absolutely no symptoms.
Yes.
So, what's the difference between the person who is heavily symptomatic when it comes to having the presence of Lyme and someone
Yeah.
who's not? It's that
It's
for whatever
terrain.
reason,
Yeah.
that second person's immune system is not reacting
Yeah.
to this bug in a way that's signaling emergency, send out inflammatory chemicals, give this person brain fog and a terrible life experience because we see this bug. So when we look at adaptogens that are immune amphoterics, even something like Schizandra is actually immune amphoteric, ashwagandha, eleuthero, especially mushrooms are highly immune amphoteric. These are adaptogens that are helping to adjust the immune response, bring it up when needed, and also bring it down when needed, and modulate an overactive immune response that's overreacting to a pathogen so that that person over time, as they, yes, get that load down, can then start to experience harmony with this bug where the immune system can see it and not feel like it needs to react.
Yeah, no, I love the way you said that, and especially because some of these syndromes or diagnoses can be so ensconced with fear. I think
Yeah.
Lyme is one of those, but many of the organisms in that family are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. And I don't know if we have research to be able to give really accurate stats on the prevalence, but given that these things can be spread by dogs, cats, mosquitoes, fleas, ticks, flies, the likelihood that many more people than we appreciate have been exposed and probably have these in their system tells us it's probably predominantly about modulation of the ecosystem, the person's ecosystem and their immune system to be able to coexist rather than thinking, oh, I've been branded now by the mark of Lyme and it means my whole life is going to be different.
Absolutely. You want to look at what are the other oxidative stressors and nutrient deficiencies that are putting that person in a
Yeah.
state where they are so reactive to not just Lyme, but stress in general and any other pathogen or food in which they come in contact with. A lot of people that deal with chronic Lyme and chronic pathogens in general also have all these food sensitivities. And it's just this sign that the immune system is reacting to being alive, period, probably because of all of these foundational factors, like I said, micronutrient deficiencies, maybe poor sleep quality, et cetera,
Yeah.
that are making them a more sensitive human. So it's really bolstering, like you said, the terrain and the resilience of that human as a whole. And adaptogens can do that while also bringing the immune response down, while also combating oxidative stress, while also helping that
Right.
sleep.
So we've talked about a few different herbs. Do you have a way that you classify these? It can be a little bit challenging maybe because so many of these herbs have such broad action, but there do seem to be some categorizations we can use, sort of adrenal adaptogens, maybe things that improve mood. But how do you sort of frame these into a heuristic if someone's trying to wrap their mind about all these herbs and how we maybe draw circles around them?
Yeah, sure. So classically, in terms of herbal actions, we have things like bitters. That's one class of herbs. Bitters are these digestive focused plants that have highly bitter alkaloids within them, that when your bitter taste receptors on your tongue recognize the presence of these alkaloids, your vagus nerve is stimulated and your entire body receives this signal that it's time to secrete our digestive juices. And in response to intaking that bitter flavor through plants before meals, through a digestive bitters blend before meals, you are able to, from a top down, brain down level, produce more of your own hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes rather than needing to take an exogenous supplement of something like enzymes. So bitters are really important. Humans evolved with the bitter flavor. We have bitter taste receptors, not just on our tongue, but in so many different parts of the body, within the gut, within the lungs even.
Hmm.
There are some groups of people out there who are looking at bitter herbs as a tool for things like asthma, because we're now seeing these bitter receptors everywhere in the lungs and we're seeing that vagus nerve stimulation. So there's some interesting future therapeutic implications for that, but largely they do act on the digestive system and help you to break down your food more completely, as well as absorb more nutrition from your meals.
Hmm.
Then we have things like, I guess today we'd call them nootropics. These would be herbs that improve cognitive function, improve brain function, memory, recall, things like that, through either exerting, again, a high antioxidant capacity within the setting of the actual neurons, and the environment of the brain, but also help to increase blood flow peripherally in order to deliver more blood, oxygen, and nutrients to the actual brain tissue. So that's things like ginkgo biloba, bacopa, rosemary. They're kind of these circulatory stimulants that would be considered nootropics. Like you said, we have adaptogens. We also have hepatic bitters that act on the liver and encourage phase 1 and 2 detoxification, and also act as cholagogues, which help to encourage us to secrete bile and also aid bile solubility so that we can break down fats better. And then we also have something like nervines. Nervines are one of my favorite classes of plants. These are anxiolytic, anti-anxiety herbs, essentially, that have a calming effect on the nervous system. And again, in a modern scientific lens, they're probably doing this through upregulating our production of calming neurotransmitters like GABA.
Let's double click on anxiety because I'd love to hear what either herb or formula you like to use for anxiety.
Mhm.
Yeah, St. John's wort, I don't think it's super effective. I could be wrong. I remember doing a brief poke. And for depression, there's some interesting information, but there wasn't the carryover I was hoping to see for anxiety. So, yeah, where do you go?
Yeah. Yeah, I think mood, the experience of a happier mood and the experience of less anxiety are two totally different things. And I think of very different plants.
Mm,
When I think of the experience of mood, I'm actually going to look towards some of those circulatory stimulants as well, things like ginkgo and rosemary to just get more blood flow up to the brain,
right.
alongside things like St. John's wort that boost serotonin levels. But in terms of anxiety, you're really wanting to look to these calming plants, everything from passion flower to kava to catnip and chamomile, which I mentioned earlier. And this is where I think the tradition of herbalism really shines, because traditionally, when folks didn't have labs and places where they could synthesize specific phytochemicals and understand what they were doing in the brain, all they had were patterns and observations. And so over time, our elders that developed the framework of traditional herbalism found that, hey, passion flower is really good for someone who has looping thoughts that keep repeating in their mind before bed. And they first kind of came to this conclusion by looking at that doctrine of signatures that I mentioned earlier, because the way that passion flower grows is it has all of these tiny tendrils and vines that tend to wrap around things. And
So
then
interesting.
people experience,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
when I have looping thoughts before bed that are kind of wrapping around my brain and can't stop, passion flower is giving me a lot of results. Then we have something like kava root that I mentioned. This is also really good for physical manifestations of anxiety. So it's a much stronger nervine than others, and it's going to have actually a physically relaxing effect. It's probably having a more pronounced effect on the vagus nerve. But essentially, this herb is really good for physical tension when your body is locked and tight when you're having anxiety. And it's also wonderful for performance anxiety. So if you're someone who's about to go give a speech or you're about to go play a musical instrument in front of an audience, I would take kava rather than taking passion flower. Then we have things like blue vervain. This is a very acrid, bitter nervine that helps a lot with tension that is in the shoulders and jaw. So they always say that blue vervine is great for perfectionists who tend to hold all of their tension right here in the jaw when things aren't going exactly their way. And then we have something like motherwort. And this is a nervine that helps when someone's anxiety is manifesting specifically as heart palpitations.
Mm.
So someone might be having anxiety concentrated specifically in the chest, burning in the chest, heart palpitations. And it's an herb that helps to impart courage spiritually and emotionally, especially when one is trying to set boundaries with other people. So this is where we get kind of into the spiritual realm of what I was taught. And I found that these herbs somehow work really well in these situations, and I have no scientific evidence for that.
Well, I mean, it's fair, and coming back to observation, I can say as a clinician, I have found in many cases the person's symptom or symptoms and then their history, what's worked, what provokes them, and then experiencing what moves the needle clinically and what doesn't, right? Maybe a certain diet helps, maybe certain herbals are or are not helpful, has been more effective than treating many labs, including something like a stool test or a SIBO breath test. So I do think where hopefully we're going, we call it evidence-based empiricism. Using the randomized control trials when we have them on something like oregano being able to be anti-SIBO, but then using the person's biofeedback empirically, are you improving, yes or no, to guide how we personalize the therapeutics to the person and getting away from treating the labs. And we've talked about this on the podcast in the past, but we recently split test two of the best stool assessments in functional medicine. One person, same stool sample, half in one kit, half in the other, and the results were vastly different. So, and this happens more often than you would think. So, if that's happening, and we're looking at we got to treat the labs, and we're going to be scientific. Well, unless we have a very, very high level of accuracy with those labs, then it's a little bit more of kind of a coin toss in terms of I'm going to use anti-candidal treatments or antibacterial treatments or prebiotics. And I think, and for our audience, this is probably trite, but it's just so important to keep repeating this because there's so much of a pull towards I'm not feeling well. The labs have the answers. And in so
Mhm.
many cases, that's just not true. And hence where I think listening to the person and having good observational data can be really helpful.
Yeah, traditional herbalism is essentially all about
Right.
observation and all about kind of listening to what the person is telling you in between the lines of what they're saying, because
Yeah.
they'll tell you where their issue lies and they'll start to talk about how they're showing up in their relationships or, certain factors and ways that their personality and dysfunction is presenting where you're like, oh, there's an herb for that.
Right. Right. Super cool. Digestion is something I know our audience cares a lot about. So you mentioned chamomile for people who was it chamomile with stress manifests in their gut. But yeah, would love to hear more
Yep.
about what some of your top go-tos and corresponding observations indicating those go-tos are.
Yeah, so chamomile is certainly for someone whose stress centralizes to their stomach, where as soon as you're stressed out, it just feels like there's a rock in your stomach, and no matter what you eat, you're just not digesting it. Everything kind of shuts off down there. So chamomile is nice because it not only acts as an anxiolytic and helps with the stress-driven fight or flight factor behind that digestive experience, but it also acts as a bit of a digestive bitter, especially if you're
Mm.
doing a very long infusion, you're steeping that chamomile for a long time. The longer that it's in that tea bag in the hot water, the more bitter it becomes. So it's kind
Right.
of like a 2 for 1 anti-anxiety, digestive bitter, super cheap, super easy remedy. And like I said earlier, my teacher, Claudia Keel, would say chamomile is for people who are crying on the outside. That's why it's really great for kids, really great for fussy children who are like, oh, my stomach hurts. Are we there yet? It's someone who has no trouble voicing their concerns and is going to tell you and complain about how they're feeling, child or adult. Whereas something like catnip, which is also a lovely anti anxiety and even digestive herb, is for someone who's going to be sitting there feeling horrible, having digestive symptoms, but they're not going to tell you how they're feeling and they're going to keep it all inside. So
Right.
even just knowing that can help you kind of customize a digestive blend for someone or try out a tea for yourself. And then we have many other digestive plants and even classes of digestive plants. There's certain things called carminatives, which are herbs that just help to release trapped gas from the digestive system. And so often that's where someone's pain and bloating and discomfort is coming from. So instead
And
of
what's an
using an
example
over the
of that
counter,
sort of herb?
so that would be something like fennel. Fennel is a
Okay.
wonderful, super easy kitchen spice that's a carminative. You can just take a few fennel seeds from a spice cabinet and chew on them before or after your meal to help
Hmm.
release some of that
Cool.
gas and resolve digestive discomfort. And then, of course, we have the bitters, like I mentioned earlier. And the key with digestive bitters is you want to take them 10 to 15 minutes before your meal so that you can have enough time for those digestive juices to be beautifully stimulated before you start eating your actual meal. And back in the day, we used to do this naturally. People used to eat bitter starters, used to eat bitter greens,
Right.
dandelion greens,
Right.
endives far more consistently than we do now. Now we just kind of go right into the meal. So I had created for my line, I have one blend called Digestive Juice, which is a digestive bitters spray so that you can just keep it in your purse, pull it out and spray
Hmm.
it right on your tongue to get that dose of bitter flavor 10 minutes before your meals. And if you're with a group of friends, you pass it around and everyone will be really surprised at how good they feel. But I also have another bitters blend called Gluco Bitters, which has more of these herbs that help to regulate your postprandial glucose response
Hmm.
to that meal. So if you're someone who tends to have a lot of fatigue after your meals, or you tend to have blood sugar spikes, highs and lows throughout the day, that's a bitters blend that has not only digestive bitters, but blood sugar balancing botanicals as well.
With the first formula that's more stimulatory, if you will, do you
Mhm.
notice if people have indigestion, reflux, heartburn? Is that like HCl, which in that symptom presentation can either make people worse or better, kind of depending on what's going on? Is it sort of a hit or miss with that group, or what do you notice?
So it's interesting. I tried to formulate it so that it would be as applicable to both of those groups as
Hmm.
possible. On the one hand, even people who have some heartburn, some acid reflux often still need some digestive support. The acid is either in the wrong place or secreting at the wrong time. They still need some support with digesting their meals. So it'll still be helpful. But for folks who have just like true acid reflux, there's some licorice root in that blend alongside the herbals to help soothe and reduce inflammation within the GI tract if you're having a constant presentation of heartburn acid reflux. So we find that a lot of folks feel a lot better just from the licorice root in that blend and then also get some digestive support. But as you know, there's a population of people who are having acid reflux and heartburn because they don't have enough stomach acid to actually signal the closing of their lower esophageal sphincter after their meal. So food is actually coming back up into the esophagus after they eat. So for that group of people, you're actually helping them to produce enough stomach acid to close the LES so that they're not having an experience of acid reflux at all.
Right. Right. Okay. So people could just try it and see how it goes, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very gentle. It's not going to make you dump massive amounts of HCl, and it's nothing like an HCl supplement. That's the thing. When you're taking Betaine HCl in supplement form, you have no idea how you're going to respond to that. That's actual like HCl that you're supplementing, and it's acid, and it can be inflammatory for a lot of people. This is just kind of stimulating your body to release its own
Right.
proper amount of digestive juices.
Right.
That's the top down effect.
Do you find certain dosing forms are better at certain points in time? I know you have tinctures, teas. I've actually been a big fan of tinctures with people who are really sensitive because you'll have no excipients. Even the cleanest supplement brands are going to have some excipient.
Mhm.
So, the other thing is if the person is really meticulous, if you will, or they don't like a bad taste, sometimes it's hard to get them to use like an artemisinin tincture, which has a really strong taste to it. So you have to know your audience. But just FYI for our audience, if you're really sensitive, then a tincture can be nice because it's a bit cleaner. But yeah, tell us more about the forms that you use and kind of what you like.
Yeah, I think that when you're trying to have an effect on like the water systems of the body is the best way I can put it. Doing something like a tea, a water soluble herbal preparation is going to be ideal for that. So if you are dealing with someone who's having a lot of dryness within their skin and their digestive system, and an herb like calendula would really help to moisten and lubricate their gut to help them have greater body-wide hydration and nutrient absorption, you're probably going to want to have them drink a calendula tea so that the delivery method can kind of act in the way that we want it to have the correct effect.
Right.
But for just dosing a therapeutic amount of herbs in a way that's really clean and really potent and really fast acting, you really can't do better than a tincture because obviously it's kind of like instant absorption and you're getting maximum surface area of ingesting that liquid. The problem, like you said, is that tinctures usually taste really bad, and that's because a lot of tinctures are alcohol based, and that's for a reason. So you have to extract, especially alkaloid rich plants in alcohol because alkaloids are only alcohol soluble. They're not going to extract into a different solvent. So what we do for our tinctures to combat the taste issue is that we extract all of our tinctures in alcohol first so that we can maximize the actual phytochemical extraction. And then we slowly cook off the alcohol as we slowly replace the alcohol with organic vegetable glycerin so that you end up having a final product that's herbs in glycerin, but they were not extracted in glycerin. And they taste a lot better because glycerin is sweet and gentle and kind of mucilaginous and doesn't burn your throat.
And do you find any difference with absorption or efficacy between the two?
No, I find that when done right, when you work with the right manufacturer who knows how to take a tincture from alcohol to glycerin, you're getting the exact same effect. If you're tincturing herbs in glycerin, you're losing. That's not gonna happen. That's not gonna get you the phytochemicals that you're looking for. So you never want to actually tincture in glycerin. Some people do this. If you're tincturing like chamomile and glycerin, that's fine. But again, if you're tincturing dense roots, things like dandelion root or burdock root, anything that has rooty alkaloids, you have to go for the alcohol.
And then people who prefer pills, those are usually options for almost any one of these plant compounds. Are there any
Mhm.
for which you would say only use this herb as a tea or as a tincture?
I would say for milk thistle, for example, only use it as a capsule or a tincture because milk thistle tea is not going to get you the phytochemicals that you're looking for. I think adaptogens are suited to capsules. I find that that's a fine delivery form because again, they're just like food-like roots and you're kind of grinding up the
Right,
root and taking it in capsule form.
right.
And even better in powder form because adaptogens taste pretty good and are mild and neutral and kind of sweet. Just putting some adaptogens into like an energy ball recipe that has some nut butter and protein powder is a great way to get a very high dose of adaptogens in through food so that you don't
Sure.
have to take a million capsules. And then other than that, again, like anything that's very rich in alkaloids, things like dandelion roots, a lot of liver herbs, I do prefer to take them in tincture form because there's that extra step of processing that really concentrates the alkaloids.
Right, right. Okay. One of the final questions I wanted to ask you is, are there any popular herbs that you think people should be wary of, avoid or not use?
I think berberine is not for everyone.
Say more.
I think, yeah, it's people are looking to berberine as a way to help resensitize their cells to insulin. So they're looking to berberine as kind of like a natural metformin, a way to help balance their blood sugar and reduce insulin resistance. And while it is able to do this, it is heavily antimicrobial and is going to have an effect against SIBO for
Mm,
many people. And if that person is not ready for a strong antimicrobial ingested daily, if their other elimination pathways aren't open, if they're constipated and not having bowel movements every day, if they are someone who needs liver support and that's not being taken into account, I feel like it can cause more side effects than
and
benefit.
it's
And
known
there
to
are
cause
much
GI
better
side effects. Yeah, I
ways.
mean, the gastrointestinal upset is one of the more reported side effects for berberine, for sure.
Yeah, and just in general, kind of like a backlog of just toxins that you're not able to release because you're killing off all these pathogens, then you're needing to kind of get rid of their waste products, but your liver pathways and bowels are not necessarily open. It's doing a lot more than just resensitizing your cells to insulin. So I think that there are better botanicals to use, even things like cinnamon that are still going to give you a wonderful effect in lowering postprandial glucose and resensitizing you to insulin that's not going to have quite as strong of an antimicrobial effect.
Gotcha. This is also where these things are a little bit complicated because I'm thinking of, I believe it's Marty Ross who recommends cinnamon, oregano, and I'm blanking on the third, but it's a 3 herb combo for chronic Lyme.
Interesting. I mean, cinnamon is antifungal. I'll give it that. It's just, I just don't find it to be nearly as strong as something like berberine. Someone could even just start adding cinnamon to their food and have a really helpful response when it comes to managing their blood sugar. So it's like, you don't have to go as far as like, now I'm going to dose myself with a bunch of berberine each day. You can kind of imbalance things more than you help them by doing that blindly, especially without a practitioner.
Yeah, I mean, it was admittedly news to me to see cinnamon ranked as like primary
Yeah.
antimicrobial. So maybe there's some synergy there, or maybe it's just they were using a formula that had
Yeah.
cinnamon and maybe more of the antimicrobial actions from the other two things. And sorry, audience, I can't think of the third. It's oregano, cinnamon, oh, and clove. Which again, to me, clove I did not associate as a strong antimicrobial, but maybe it's mostly the
I mean,
oregano.
cinnamon's high. Yeah, cinnamon's high in essential oils, high in cinnamon aldehydes and other things like that. So essential oils are always going to be antimicrobial. So it's not impossible. And I think the synergy is probably very much part of it. But
Right.
yeah, I just don't find people to have like die off effects from cinnamon, whereas
I think that's
berberine,
fair. Yeah.
you're often going to
Right.
get that.
Right. Anything you want to say in close? I mean, please tell the audience more. You have a really big Instagram following. Much of your page is just super insightful and intuitive lessons or musings. You have a line of herbs you've developed. So where can people connect with you and learn more about what you offer?
Yeah, thank you. I've certainly cataloged my journey for the last 8 or 9 years on my Instagram. It's at organic_Olivia. Nowadays, I really mostly post my podcast clips because I'm kind of passing the torch to the next generation of experts and wanting to give them the airtime on my platform. But you can go back through my highlights and archives, and I have a lot of things that I've shared from my own healing journey and just herbal insights for you. And then you can go to my website, organiclivia.com. I have a ton of helpful blog posts that I've written throughout the years on all different herbs. And that's where you can find my full herbal line, Organic Olivia. I have an adaptogen blend that is very neutral. I have digestive bitters. I have an anti anxiety blend called Peace Juice. So, a lot of the things that we talk about, I have formulated for in a way that is meant to help the maximum amount of people possible.
Awesome. Well, Olivia, I appreciate you taking the time, and it's been a really fun conversation. I think herbs, like we've been outlining, have so much potential to help people, and they're so available. They're so simple. So I would definitely encourage people to check out your work, do some experimentation, whether it be catnip, chamomile, whatever it is, and see if you can use these herbs that have been used for so long to help sort of fine tune your health. So just been great, and thank you again.
Thanks so much for the space to have the conversation.